In this video, you are going to learn how to write a linear relationship equation to describe the relationship shown on a graph. The linear relationship equation is y equals to mx, where m represents the slope of the line. So in order for you to write this equation, first you must find the slope. To find the slope, we have two formulas. You can either use rise over run, or you can use y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Whichever one you use, it will give you the same slope. We are going to look at two examples. Looking at example number 1, it says, write an equation to describe the relationship shown in the graph. All this is saying, what equation can we use to describe the relationship between these two quantities, the distance, which is miles, and also the gasoline or gallons that you use to travel those distance. In order for us to write the equation, we need to find the slope. This is the linear relationship equation, y equals to mx. To find m, we can either use rise over run, or rise divided by run, or you can use y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. I'm going to show you how to use these two formulas to find the slope in order to write the equation. Let us use rise over run first. To use rise over run, we need at least 2 points on the graph. Already they give you 1 point, so all we need is 1 more point. I'm going to use this point, and point is just basically a location on the graph. I am going to use this point. Let me write the coordinates for this point. Coordinates just mean my x and my y values. So this is saying when x is 1, y is 20. All this is saying is basically where the x and the y cross each other or meet at that point. Now let us label our second point here. This is saying when x is 4, y is 80. Now that I have labeled my points, I am going to use my rise over run. But before you can use rise over run, you need to know how to read the scale on the graph. You need to know how to read the scale on the y-axis and the scale on the x-axis. You need to know by how much unit is increased, it's going up, or by how many units you're going on the x-axis. If you look at the y, each of these side, which is the square, one side of the square is 20 units. That means halfway between 0 and 20, or halfway between 20 and 40 is 10, right? So each of these sides, right, is 20 units. You're going up by 20. If you look at your x-axis, each of the sides of the square, or the unit square, is 1 unit. Now that we understand how to read the scale, let us now use rise over run to find our slope. So how do I get from this point here at the bottom to this point here at the top? I am going to rise 20, 40, 60. I'm going to rise 60 units on my y-axis. So I rise 60. And then I'm going to run over 3 units to get to this point. So I rise 60 units and I run 3 units to get to this second point. So if I divide 60 by 3, I am going to get 20 over 1, or 20. So using rise over run, my slope is 20. And it's going to be a positive 20 because the line is trending upwards. All right, so remember now to get to my point, from my point at the bottom to my point at the top, I use rise over run, where I rise 60 units and run 3 units to get to that second point. Now that I have found my slope, I'm going to write my equation. So my equation is y equals to, now that I know what is m, which is 20, I'm going to replace m in the equation with the value for m, which is 20. So my equation is y equals to 20x. And that is how you write the equation to describe the relationship in the graph using rise over run. Now let us use the other slope formula. Now to use this slope formula, I need to know which one of these values is my y2, y1, x2, x1. So let me just label those. So this one, I'm going to call this my y2. It doesn't really matter which x value is y x2 or x1, or which y value is your x, is your y2, y1. All right. So if that is my y2, this is going to be my x2. Remember, at all times, x come before y. Your x values are the one that comes first when you write the ordered pair. Now, this is going to be my y1, and this is going to be my x1. Now that I have labeled my coordinates, I am going to substitute those values into my slope formula. So it is going to be 20, which is my y2, minus 80, which is my y1, and divided by 1, which is my x2, minus 4, which is my x1. Now I'm going to simplify my numerator by subtracting those two values. So 20 minus 8 is going to be negative 60. And now I need to simplify my denominator. 1 minus 4 is going to be negative 3. When you divide a negative by a negative, your answer is going to be positive. Now 60 divided by 3 is going to be 20. So again, my slope is positive 20. So m is equals to 20. Now that I know my slope, I'm going to write my equation. Now my equation is y equals to 20x. As I said before, it doesn't really matter which one of these formula you use, rise over run or the slope formula, you will get the same answer for the slope. And again, when you're writing the linear relationship equation, the only thing you need to find is the slope. Once you find the slope, just replace the m in the equation with the actual value for m and write your equation. We are going to look at another example, how to write an equation to model a situation and also to use that equation to solve problem. The example reads, a park volunteer plans to work on the park stone walls for 1 hour every Monday, 1 hour every Wednesday, and 3 hours on Friday. The graph shows the number of hours he plans to work for a given number of weeks. A, find the constant of proportionality of the line, then find the slope of the line. B, write an equation to model a relationship. And C, how many hours will the volunteer work in 16 weeks? So this is the graph to my right. My x-axis, which is my horizontal length or horizontal distance, represent the number of weeks, and my y-axis represents the volunteer hours, or how many hours the person will volunteer. Looking at this graph, how can I find my constant of proportionality? The graph is what we call a proportional graph. As we discussed in previous video, a graph is proportional if two conditions are met. One, it must be a straight line, and two, that straight line must start from the origin or goes through the origin. So once it's a proportional relationship graph, you can just use one point on the graph to find the constant of proportionality. So I am going to choose this point right here in the corner of the unit square. I like to choose my point here. Why? It is easy for me to identify my y and my x coordinate. So if I label this point with my x and y coordinate, this is going to be when x is 2, my y is, let us look on my scale on the y-axis. So looking at the scale, it is going up by 4. That means each of these unit squares represent 2 units. So if here is 0, that means here is going to be 2, here is going to be 4, here's 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. So this is saying when x is 2, at this point, when x is 2, y is 10. And again, this point basically means where the x and the y crosses each other. Now that I have identified one point on my graph, I am going to go ahead and use that point to find my constant of proportionality. To find my constant of proportionality, all I need to do is to divide my y value, and to represent constant, k is normally used to denote constant. To find k, we divide y by x. So it is going to be 10 divided by 2. So k is equals to 10 divided by 2. 10 is my y, 2 is my x, which is going to be equals to 5. So my constant of proportionality of the line is 5. Now, the other part of the question says that we should also find the slope of the line. As mentioned in previous video, once the graph is a proportional graph, constant, the slope, and the unit rate is the same. So if the constant is 5, this means that the slope is also going to be 5. Now, we are going to use rise over run to show you that the slope is the same as a constant. All right, so to use rise over run, again, we need 2 points on the graph. So already I have 1 point here, and I'm going to use this point that is right here in the corner of the square. Now, how can I get from my first point here at the bottom to this second point here at the top using rise over run? How many units do I need to go up on my y, and how many units do I need to run on my x to get to that point? So let us see. This point to here is going to be 2, 4, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So this means I need to rise 10 units on my y-axis. Then I'm going to run from here to here is 1, and from here to here is 2. So I need to run 2 units on my x to get to that second point. So to get from the point at the bottom to the point at the top, I rise 10 units on my y-axis and 2 units on my x-axis. Now, what is 10 divided by 2? 10 divided by 2 is equals to 5. So using rise over run, I still get the slope to be 5. So as we said before, once the graph is a proportional graph, the slope is the same as the constant of proportionality. So now let us look at part B. It says write an equation to model the relationship. So our linear equation is y equals to mx, where m represents the slope. So in part A, we already find our slope, and our slope is 5. So all we need to do is to replace m in the equation with 5 to complete our equation. So it's going to be y equals to 5x. So this is our equation that represent or describe the relationship shown on this graph. Moving on to part C, it says, How many hours will the volunteer work in 16 weeks? To find the number of hours the volunteer will work in 16 weeks, we can use our equation. Because remember, the equation describes the relationship between the number of weeks and the volunteer hours. So let me just rewrite my equation here. 5xy equals to 5x. So all I need to do is to substitute some values in this equation to find how many hours will the volunteer work in 16 weeks. So if you look at our graph, our y represents the volunteer hours. So in this equation, we are finding y. To find y, we must know what is x. So x here represents the number of weeks. And how many weeks do we want to know for? We want to know for 16 weeks. So all I need to do to find y is to multiply my constant, which is 5, times x, which is 16, to find my y. So when I multiply those two, y is going to be equals to 80 hours, because 5 times 16 is 80. And we're talking about hours, so it's going to be 80 hours. So going back to the question, how many hours will the volunteer work in 16 weeks? In 16 weeks, the volunteer will work 80 hours. And that is how you use your equation to solve problem. So once you know the constant, you can use it to find whether you're finding y or you're finding x, and those depend on what the situation is or what the question asks you to do. And this is again how you write an equation, how you find the slope or the constant, and how you use the equation to solve problem.